the requirement for fiber in the human diet is not 1 single gram ever. There is no evidence suggesting saturated fat is in any way deleterious to health outcomes in humans over any period of time. Layne Norton. Rubbish. Complete rubbish. None of those things are true. Absolutely false.
The reason I became quite convinced of the healthfulness of dietary fiber
is because you are a buffoon, an imbecile, and Dunning-Kruger on feet. You are incompetent to take a position. Your opinion is worthless, disingenuous at best. It's downright dishonest. So very, very brave that you are too afraid to front up for a live debate concerning any topic. Right, staff, settle down. A lot to get through in this briefing for the Meat Militia. If this is your first ride on the Meat Militia crazy train, welcome. What we do here is overcome very, very bad ideas with much, much better ones. Don't we, Ted? Thank you for your input. We'll see you later in the show. Ted likes to have his say as well. Today we're dealing with Layne Norton, a so-called nutrition scientist, so-called, holding a PhD, apparently, but still unable to correctly state, let alone apply correctly, the first law of thermodynamics. That's embarrassing for you, Layne. Dear oh dear. Let's see what Layne had to say during this discussion he had with somebody, and we'll put it right where it's wrong, which, knowing Layne Norton, will be everywhere. Off you go, Layne.
What do you think about carnivore as a diet?
Speaking of extremes that hate you.
Okay, so straight out with the opinions. No science whatsoever. Good.
I will give a devil's advocate argument for it. Any diet that is going to get people to eat less processed foods and more filling, satiating foods is going to be a diet that does better than the standard American.
Yes, the standard American, standard Western diet is the worst possible diet for a human being long term. Absolutely. Agreed. The second worst is veganism. The appropriate diet for a human being is a hyper-carnivore.
I have no doubt that there are people who go on carnivore and they get healthier.
Yes, many, many of us. Thousands of us. Tens, hundreds of thousands of us. Probably millions, actually.
The question really becomes, why did you need to do that? Could you do that and still have some dietary fiber?
Well, the requirement for fiber in the human diet, Layne Norton, is not 1 single gram ever. None at all. If anything, it's counterproductive. Go and look up Dr. Paul Mason and fiber on the YouTubes. He covers the one and only one, even pseudo-randomized, pseudo-clinical study that's been done on this topic, dealing with people with so-called idiopathic constipation. It's a great read, Layne Norton. Go and have a look at that.
And get the benefits of that.
There are no benefits of fiber.
I have had carnists push back against me. Well, dietary fiber is just filler.
Correct. It just bulks up your stool and irritates your gut, destroys its function, it seems. It's problematic. You don't need it. In fact, your body would rather you don't put that in.
You don't even absorb it. In fact,
correct.
In carnivore, I don't even poop as much.
Correct. You don't defecate as much or as frequently on a carnivore diet.
Because, I'm absorbing so many more nutrients.
That's right, because we're absorbing what we eat instead of having to shit it out. The stuff that we cannot absorb, i.e. fiber, to any degree.
Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, but blah, 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 blah doesn't add anything, Layne.
And I always find these really Olympic level mental gymnastics interesting because...
Says the bloke who can't correctly state the first law of thermodynamics, let alone apply it correctly. Says a bloke who thinks mass is conserved.
It's not like we don't just have tons of studies in humans looking at this.
We don't.
With actual hard human health outcomes.
That's the problem though, isn't it, Layne? There's nothing like a remotely well-controlled, well-observed, properly disciplined study, metabolic ward lock-in over any period of time in human beings, because you simply cannot do such studies. It's impossible ethically, it's impossible practically, it's impossible financially, it'll never be done. This whole area is a ring-fenced area of ideology and not science. Sorry about that.
And what the criticism of a lot of these studies is, because one of the downsides of nutritional studies is it's hard to do multi-year randomized control trials.
The word you're looking for there, Layne Norton, is impossible, not hard.
You're going to lock someone in diet jail for 3 years at a time.
Yeah, I mean, I think people have this misunderstanding that there's just this random pool of people that are test subjects for different studies that just sit there waiting patiently for the researchers to come get them, and that's their life's purpose. And it's like, no, there are people like you and me who see a flyer and go, oh, I'll try that. And, a lot of them drop out. Why? Because the more controlled you try to make it, the less likely people are to do do it.
Right, and the less scientific it becomes, the less applicable the results become, the less extrapolable the results become, the less value they have, such that your average nutritional study, Layne Norton, has value 0. In fact, especially if you want to talk about cause and effect, absolutely 0 in that case.
Great example is people are like, why didn't they do more studies in bodybuilders? And I'm like, because they suck as test subjects. Because what happens when you're a bodybuilder who gets randomized to the low protein arm of a protein study? You're immediately dropping out, right?
Yeah.
Or if you've got a bias, if maybe you think a low carb diet's really good and you get randomized to a high carb diet, see ya, so it's hard to do these for long periods of time.
Still, the word you're looking for is impossible, Layne Norton. Please be accurate with people. And while you're doing that, perhaps you'd like to be accurate about what the first law of thermodynamics says and what it doesn't say and how to apply it correctly. No? Okay, carry on.
Keep a level of control. So we have to rely on, a lot of times, shorter term randomized controlled trials looking at markers of health that are...
Right, so rubbish then. We're not interested in markers, Layne Norton. We're interested in hard health outcomes. And if you can't provide data on that, the best thing you could do is to sit down and shut up.
Hopefully predicting longer term health outcomes.
Well, that's the thing. Hopefully predicting. No, Layne Norton. No.
And long-term cohort studies. Now, cohort studies are kind of an arm of epidemiology. You have your cross-sectional studies, which are, we look at this population and this population, who has a greater rate of X disease and what differences do they have?
Right, so the number of degrees of freedom between these separate subpopulations is usually so vast, so confounding, so covariate, so collinear as to render findings of prospective cohort studies, which are badly named because they're nothing to do with prospects of anybody. They are a retrospective look of what happened in those people at that time under the circumstances that those people were living, not extrapolable to another population at all. And also, before the authors publish such so-called prospective cohort studies, what they invariably do is adjust the outcomes is what they do. In other words, they fabricate results to suit their funding source is what happens, isn't it, Ted?
Very good.
Thought you'd say that.
Well, those are difficult because there's a lot of confounding variables. Cohort studies are...
The word isn't difficult, the word is impossible to provide utility to anybody. Layne Norton, still.
A little bit better because what you're doing is you're tracking the same people over, say, 20, 30 years.
No, you're not. You're checking in with them perhaps annually, if you're lucky, and asking them a few selected questions and writing down what they said. That's not science either, Layne Norton. Sorry about that.
You're not doing any intervention, but you're...
Right, so you're not doing science then, because science is interventional and under control. Right, good.
Saying, okay, these people ate more fiber.
No, that's what they said they were doing, Layne Norton. Did the researchers go and watch these people, all of them, several 100,000 of them, every single day of their 5-year follow-up, whatever it is, to make sure that these people accurately record what they did in fact eat? No? Are we done? What do you think, Ted?
Are you retarded?
I think he is, literally.
Versus these people and had this outcome. Now, what I'll say is the reason I became quite convinced of the healthfulness of dietary fiber
is because you are a buffoon, an imbecile, and Dunning-Kruger on feet, Layne Norton. It is because you are the least scientific person I have come across in a long, long time, despite the fact that you hold a PhD in some field of science, apparently. No, son. What is next?
Are you familiar with a forest plot?
Oh, God. A forest plot. Yes, okay, go on.
Forest plot. This became famous because James Wilkes was on Joe Rogan debating the Game Changers a long time ago and kept bringing up a forest plot because the person he was debating didn't know what it was. Essentially,
it's a good tactic when you're debating is to use things that people don't know what they are. It doesn't make you right, though, about what you've got to say.
If you have a meta-analysis of studies and you have a center line, which means no effect, no overall effect of treatment.
No, it means no statistical difference between two groups of people, whatever those groups may have been beforehand.
And then on one side of the line, you'll have favors X treatment. Other side of the line favors Y treatment.
But it's not a favoring, nor is it a cause and effect thing. We're talking about associations, universally adjusted before the forest plotters created Layne Norton, i.e. fabricated data sets. Scientists record observations and report those under control. Buffoons, imbeciles, and anti-scientists use prospective cohort studies in nutrition as some guide to cause and effect, when it's completely incapable of informing on that topic whatever. And only buffoons, incompetent buffoons, Dunning-Kruger sufferers like yourself, take this rubbish remotely seriously even for a second. Layne Norton.
And then you plot each of the studies where they land.
Plus or minus error.
You have, like, this side is Faber's dietary fiber.
Which it still doesn't. It's an association of an adjusted data set still.
Or decreasing cardiovascular disease.
No.
mortality, cancer, literally every study is on.
Literally, you say. Okay, good. Because you said literally, it must be literally correct, Layne, mustn't it? Literally.
Positive.
Yes.
Right.
You might have some that
Oh, good input. Good input there from the host. Thank you.
didn't show a significant effect or not a huge effect, but they're all on this side. I am not aware of any cohort study that showed fiber or fruits and vegetables did not have at least a neutral, and most of them show a very positive dose response effect on.
There you go. There's your problem, Layne Norton. Effect is the conjugate of cause, isn't it, son? Yes. You're talking about cause and effect, therefore, aren't you, son? Yes. From a prospective cohort study, aren't you, son? Yes. Which is adjusted, i.e. fabricated, isn't it, son, anyway? Yes. You're a buffoon, aren't you, son? Yes. You're not competent to speak about science publicly, are you, Layne Norton? No. And we already knew that anyway because here's a bloke, as I said, who cannot correctly state the first law of thermodynamics, let alone correctly apply it. That's what we'd expect from a buffoon like that, isn't it? Shall we move on, staff? What's next?
Mortality, cardiovascular disease,
What's
and
dose
cancer.
response?
So meaning if they do what's called a meta-regression, so they look at the different levels of dietary fiber intakes in these.
No, what people reported, Layne, not what they actually consumed at all, and it's adjusted still. So fabricated still.
Cohorts, then try to compare that to their risk of mortality.
No, not risk, because risk is also a cause and effect statement. It implies that there is a mechanism at hand which is established. There isn't, Layne. It's a speculation. It's not science. It's rubbish. And you are a buffoon still.
Cardiovascular disease and cancer, they can basically say, for example, in one meta-analysis that was recent, I think it was with over 1 million subjects.
So what? Big pile of turd doesn't make the quality of the turd in that pile any different. It's still just a big pile of turd. And this is not science, Layne Norton.
For every 10-gram increase in dietary fiber,
as reported by people and then adjusted by the authors before publishing their results, remember, still.
there was a corresponding 10% decrease in the relative risk.
No, not risk, still, because that's a cause and effect statement. We're speaking about an association, and the association is between one made-up variable and another one. So not of any value scientifically or utility to anybody, whatever. Also, the magnitudes of the differences reported in all such so-called prospective cohort studies are so close to zero, it actually makes no odds for any given living human being over a 100-year lifespan. Layne Norton, that's what the statistics tell us. Once you're competent to assess statistics, which you clearly are not currently, you'll understand this, perhaps. But perhaps first, go and learn about the first law of thermodynamics so that you can correctly tell us what it actually says.
Of mortality, cancer, and cardiovascular disease.
None of those things are true.
Before anybody goes, well, I'm just going to eat 100 grams of fiber a day and live forever, we are talking about relative risk, and it's important to point out the difference.
No, it's still not a risk factor. It's still an inappropriately misused word. These prospective cohort studies cannot inform on risk, period.
Which a lot of people don't get when they hear these things reported on the news. So when I say a 10% decrease in the risk of mortality,
then what you're showing is your incompetence to understand what has been done, the methodology by which it has been done, and the utility of the nonsense spat out by these turds, Layne Norton.
if we're looking at, say, and I'm just making up numbers here,
Yes, just like the authors of these studies, Layne. Same problem. Not really very good, is it? No.
but if we're looking at, say, a 60-year-old person and their risk of mortality in the next
Well, there is nothing that can inform us on the risk of mortality of a 60-year-old person in the nutrition science field. Nothing at all. There are no studies that can inform.
10 years is 20%, right?
Well, that's just a made-up number, isn't it, Layne? Who cares?
It's probably not. It's probably different than that. But let's say it's 20%. A 10% relative risk reduction is an absolute reduction of 2%.
But it's still not a cause and effect relationship even in that case. So it's still of no value or utility to anybody at all.
Because 2% is 10% of 20%. So for every 10-gram increment of increased fiber,
As reported fallaciously by people and then adjusted fallaciously by authors thinking that that's an acceptable thing to do with a data set.
they showed a 10% decrease in the risk of these.
No, they didn't still, because these studies still cannot inform on risk, not one jot, Layne Norton. Not at all.
different diseases and mortality. If there are other things that there are claims about, like, for example, people on carnivore, it's so funny. They'll be like, why are you trying to, discourage high quality animal protein consumption? I'm like, sorry, not to sound curt, but do you know who I am?
Yes, we do know who you are, Layne Norton. You are a Dunning-Kruger sufferer on feet who happens to hold a PhD and has a few publications to his name, but who cannot correctly state the first law of thermodynamics, let alone apply it correctly, and then who will sit there and arrogantly chuckle his way through an absolutely incompetent description of pseudoscience as if it was science. Complete rubbish.
Have you done any background on me?
I have, Layne, yes. I know exactly who you are and exactly where your failings are.
My research was funded.
That's what we do here in the Meat Militia. We overcome very bad ideas with much, much better ones. Don't we, Ted?
Very good. Are you retarded?
Thank you, Ted, for your input. Carry on, Layne.
My lab was funded by the National Dairy Council, the Egg Nutrition Center, and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. If anybody has a bias towards high-quality animal protein, it's me.
No, Layne, not at all. You are a small-scale researcher with a few things under your belt. That's all.
I'm just not crazy.
Well, that's debatable.
When we look at, say, a great example is red meat. So
again, with the brain fog and the changing subject every 3 seconds, the all over the place nonsense here, this is just an absolute, well, I was going to say brain fart, but Layne Norton, I would suspect, probably doesn't possess a functioning cerebellum at all, actually. So it's just a fart.
The has categorized.
All right, so now you're going to go to appeal to authority fallacy and name an organization with credibility minus several billions with a B. An organization that has repeatedly cut its own throat, exsanguinated itself, disemboweled itself with its statements on all sorts of topics. And its behavior, its anti-humanist behavior towards people. Great. So credibility, Layne Norton, minus several trillions with a T now.
Red meat as probably carcinogenic.
Well, who cares? That's an opinion. There are no scientific studies that can support that claim. None at all.
I don't necessarily believe it's carcinogenic based on the research that's out there.
Which is none, Layne Norton. There are no experimental studies that can inform us on carcinogenicity or otherwise of meat or anything else in human beings.
And the reason is a lot of studies don't show that it's carcinogenic. A lot of these
no studies show that it's carcinogenic. Not one or otherwise. Still.
Cohort studies don't see it.
Cohort studies do not inform on cause and effect, ergo cannot inform on this question. Lame.
That's the show getting it from.
Well, they're pulling it out of some orifice based on the agenda of the powers that be in that organization. Nothing to do with looking after humanity or its health, whatever.
Well, I would say over half of them do.
No, they don't. There are no studies that show any such thing, you incompetent buffoon. Not one.
Some of them don't.
None of them do, one way or the other, still.
And if you look at the confounding variables of people who are high red meat consumption.
Right, so unhealthy user bias. We're done. Good.
It's not like we're talking about bodybuilders eating sirloin.
Bodybuilders are not healthy people, Layne Norton, in general. Oh my goodness.
Most of them are getting it from like processed sources of red meat. And one of the problems...
The word and has one syllable, Layne Norton. It's not and, it's and. A-N-D. Goodness sake.
With the studies as well, is if you are eating more of one thing, you're typically eating less of another thing.
Yes, but also if you're asked to recall what you had for breakfast last Tuesday, Layne Norton, you won't be able to do it, will you? Let alone fill out a survey once a year if you're lucky about your eating patterns. Get the fuck out of here.
And actually, red meat intake is actually quite a good proxy for poor diet quality.
Unhealthy user bias doesn't actually mean it's anything to do with the meat that's unhealthy. It's the lifestyles of people who tend to gravitate towards that. But you're forgetting about carnivores who don't have unhealthy lifestyles in general. This video, by the way, is nearly halfway through, and the title of this video is The Hidden Dangers of the Carnivore Diet. We haven't heard one yet. Not a single one.
There was a really good study from...
No, there isn't, Layne, before you even tap one. No, there isn't.
I think Maximova in Canada, Alberta, Canada in 2020, and they looked at trying to control for diet quality. So
well, you can't. Control is exerted prior to data collection, Layne, not afterwards. Multivariate regression cannot inform on causality any more than single-variate regression can, you buffoon.
They did basically tertile, so 3 different levels of red meat intake.
So what? And now we're going to granulate it? We're going to make people into 3 buckets based on a wide range of intake of red meat, rather than doing a regression as observed between the variables, which are continuous. That's some good sciencing.
With 3 different levels of fruit and vegetable intake.
Same problems.
And looking at the incidence of cancer.
Well, incidence. Incidence has nothing to do with cause nor effect.
And what they found was that at low intakes of fruit and vegetable intake, yes, there was an association of high red meat intake with cancer.
Okay, so unhealthy user bias, people who tend to gravitate towards that. Anything to do with the fact that they were eating meat and not much fruit? No, not at all. There is no data to underpin that claim. That is a speculation. And it's frankly fucking ridiculous because we've been eating almost no fruit and a lot of meat for about 4.5 million fucking years, Layne Norton.
But at high level of fruit and vegetable intake and high levels of red meat consumption, the risk of cancer...
No, not risk. There are no studies that can inform us on risk. Not one. Anywhere.
Was actually lower...
No, it wasn't, because no studies can inform on that question.
...than low red meat consumption with high fruit and vegetable consumption because...
No, not because now you're going to start speculating on cause and effect. And these studies still cannot inform on that question at all.
People who are eating a lot of meat meat and a lot of fruit and vegetables, they're probably not eating a lot of low quality foods because you just don't have a bunch left in your diet for that.
So is the primary concern or the biggest risk that you're worried about from...
now we're actually going to get to some risks of the carnivore diet, are we? Over halfway through the video.
For low dietary fiber?
That's one?
Well, no, Layne, because the exact requirement for fiber is still not 1 single gram ever. What's next?
And then a lot of them are choosing very fatty cuts of meat that are...
There is no problem with dietary animal fat, Layne.
High in saturated fat.
Saturated fat is not problematic. It is not a nutrient of concern. There are 5 major meta-analyses available which even look for an association between the so-called intake of saturated fat and disease mortality outcomes, and not one of them found a meaningful difference between cohorts. While an association cannot prove cause and effect is at play, the absolute lack of an association is a pretty good pointer to the lack of a cause and effect mechanism, because the result is absent that you would expect. Okay? This isn't difficult. Even if you are so very, very intellectually challenged as to be unable to state the first law of thermodynamics, let alone apply it correctly, Layne Norton. You're also a very, very brave, big, strong, gruff bodybuilder chappy, aren't you, Layne Norton? So very, very brave that you are too afraid to front up to yours truly, the Field Marshal, for a live debate concerning any topic. Very, very brave of you.
Big debate amongst diet tribes about whether saturated fat is bad for you.
There is no debate to be had. There is no evidence suggesting saturated fat is in any way deleterious to health outcomes in humans over any period of time whatsoever, Layne Norton.
Because it raises LDL cholesterol.
Which is not the cause of heart disease. Wrong again, Layne Norton.
And there's a debate around LDL cholesterol.
No, there isn't. Well, there isn't one to be had. I've dealt with that on my channel already many, many times if folks would like to go and have a look at the actual science presented by an actually competent scientist, which isn't Layne Norton.
And I will give you the devil's advocate argument for that, and then I will give you what the research says. So in 2005, when I was in grad school, I was in the camp of LDL doesn't really matter. It's more about the ratio of HDL to LDL.
It's nothing to do with that either, Layne Norton. Blood lipids are not causal factors in heart disease atherosclerosis, period.
The good cholesterol to bad cholesterol.
No such thing exists. For a start, cholesterol only comes in one form, Layne Norton. It doesn't come in different forms, one of which is good and one of which is bad. So this is something you clearly ought not to be speaking publicly on whatsoever.
Look at the research studies.
I have done very closely as a cardiovascular pathophysiologist, among other things, during my former academic career. Before I became the Field Marshal of the Meat Militia, Layne, I was actually a scientist myself for 20-something years. I do know this area like the back of my hand.
There was a lot of disagreement in the research literature.
Well, there you go. If there was good, solid evidence to be had one way or the other, there wouldn't be a discussion, would there, Layne? No.
And a lot of the randomized control trials didn't...
There are no randomized control trials with any decent control or observation over any decent period of time in human beings as regards heart disease.
Really show an effect of lowering saturated fat on the risk of heart disease.
That's because those things are not connected, Layne. So of course it didn't show anything of the sort.
But here's the problem with randomized control trials.
Oh, here we go.
They're very short.
Ah, right. Because you can't keep people locked in labs for decades at a time. Good. It kind of circles back to my point from the beginning, doesn't it?
Heart disease is not something that develops in 2 years.
Correct.
It develops in 40 years.
Or shorter, depending on how badly you behave.
Heart disease is not the difference between you dying at age 40 and age 80. It's the difference between you dying at age 80 and age 72.
No, it isn't, Layne.
And so a lot of these randomized control trials, they're using, the Minnesota coronary experiment is one that gets cited by carnivore people a lot. Paul Saladino cites it a lot.
Well, Paul Saladino is not a carnivore people. Paul Saladino is a buffoon, another Dunning-Kruger sufferer of the highest order, an imbecile, and completely incompetent to speak on human nutrition. His training is allopathic medicine and then psychiatry, neither of which he's ever practiced, actually, as it turns out. He is a social media influencer who happens to hold an MD. He knows nothing about nutrition or human metabolism, clearly. Neither can he competently assess a research paper, as I have shown repeatedly on my channel. If people would like to search Paul Saladino on my channel, you'll have a bundle of laughs. Won't they, Ted?
I think it's terrific. I loved it.
Good. Thank you for that.
The strengths of it were it was inpatient, they were psychiatric patients, and they either fed them high polyunsaturated fats or high saturated fat diets.
Over what period of time?
The differences in heart attack.
And were they genotypically, phenotypically identical, these subcohorts at the outset? No? Are we done then?
Attack rates or heart disease.
So basically, you're just filling the void with meaningless noise here, Layne Norton. You are not providing any information of scientific utility or practical utility for any person anywhere in the world at any time. All you're doing is feathering your own nest and leading stupid people to believe that you have some credibility to speak on these topics. It's actually disingenuous at best. It's downright dishonest. You really need to stop. Probably before you stop, though, the first thing you should do is you should make a trip to my Fine channel and face me like an actual man and deal with the inaccuracies in your ridiculous nonsense face to face with an actual scientist who will run rings around you. And that's just Ted. I'll be there too.
Now, what they don't tell you about that experiment is those people were not housed consecutively. The average duration of each of the subjects in that study was 2 years.
Right, well, that's not enough to make proclamations about anything then. So good, we're done.
And they were like, I think the average age was like mid-40s.
So why are you telling us the reasons why a study that seems or may seem to exonerate the consumption of meat and fat is a problem, and you want to point to all the problems in such a study, Layne Norton, but you don't point to those exact same issues that exist in the studies that support what you seem to support? Cherry picking much? It's incredible, by which I mean lacking credibility, Layne Norton.
It's not super common for people in their 40s to get heart attacks, even those who are inclined.
Well, these days things are a bit different, aren't they, Layne?
To get it. And they were in and out of these psychiatric wards. They weren't consecutively. And
now there's still just one syllable in the word and, Layne.
The polyunsaturated fat group included trans fats.
Yep, which is bad, to use your double syllabic slang there.
Which at the time now are largely out of the food supply, but back then were a big part of the food supply. So it's not really an experiment that carries a lot of weight. And
right, there are no experiments that carry any weight still, Layne Norton, on either side of this theological divide in human nutrition.
Again, it's only 2 years.
You said that, remember?
Hard to see differences. If you and
You said that.
I invest in a mutual fund. So with LDL...
Look, financial funds have nothing to do with science, Layne Norton. This is a completely inept analogy before you even begin.
cholesterol, you're looking at a lifetime exposure risk.
Okay, well, great. Show me the area under the curve for someone's cholesterol exposure for a lifetime with repeated measurements of that person's cholesterol. Any person you like. Should we wait for that?
Really, how much courses through your arteries over the course of your life?
Who knows? That's the problem, Layne. We don't have an area under the curve measurement for any person existing, let alone hundreds of thousands of them.
I like to compare it to investing.
Well, that's an inept analogy.
If you and I invest in a mutual fund that gets 8%, and I invest in one that gets 9%, if we look out in 2 years, I mean, I'll have a little bit more money, but practically
Depends on how much we each invested, doesn't it, Layne? But it's still an inept analogy.
you'll go, it's no different. But if we look out in 40 years, I'm going to
Again, it still depends on how much money you invested in the first place. That's why your analogy is completely fucking inept, you buffoon.
have a lot more money than you. And so heart disease is kind of the same. It
No, it isn't, Layne Norton, not at all.
takes time to
Yes, that is true. The part that it takes time, we understood that in the first place, though. We didn't need your ridiculous analogy.
really see these differences. And people on carnivore will say, well, I feel great. You can feel great right up until you have a heart attack.
Absolutely. Show me some people having heart attacks on the carnivore diet that have been on the carnivore diet for multiple decades, i.e. there's no confounding covariation collinearities. Shall we wait for that?
Heart disease is not something you feel.
Well, it is when it happens. You bet it is. I know, I've seen it many, many times as a clinician in my own right.
Looking at LDL cholesterol really changed my mind.
There's actually no such thing before we get going. There is no such thing as LDL cholesterol, Layne Norton. So right there, you might as well just shut your ignorant mouth. You are out of your lame and out of your lame. You're out of your lane and out of your depth.
On it because, again, I was in that camp.
You know, who cares what camp you're in, Layne Norton? You are incompetent to take a position. Your opinion is worthless.
It's what were called the Mendelian randomization
Oh, here we go. Mendelian studies. Good. This will be a laugh.
trials that started coming out around 2008, 2009. Now, Mendelian randomization is where they look at your body. People's bodies naturally have like polymorphisms on genes.
Yes.
So you'll have people who secrete naturally more or less LDL.
That is true, perhaps.
But these polymorphisms don't affect other areas of metabolism.
False, Layne Norton. Absolutely false. There's your problem.
So what you have essentially is a great lifelong randomized control trial.
False. You have nothing of the sort, you incompetent, ridiculous buffoon. Not so at all.
Of people exposed to more LDL cholesterol.
No, in fact, show me the area under the curve for LDL exposure over a lifetime in any given living human being with any given SNP or not, Layne Norton. Shall we wait? No such area under the curve measurements exist, not even in Mendelian studies. They don't even measure people's cholesterol, and yet the studies claim to be able to speak about exposure to cholesterol. Well, Layne Norton, any given gene is not a fait accompli for the expression, in fact, of someone's, for example, LDL. Go and have a look at a study done N = 1, I understand, recently by Nick Norwitz, where he changed his LDL by over 100 points in 24 hours by changing his diet. Did he change his genes in 24 hours, Layne Norton? No, he didn't. Stick the Mendelian studies right up your anal orifice and light the fuse, son. They are worthless. They are no better than these cohort studies. In fact, they are weaker because they guess at what people's cholesterol was on the basis of what genes they carry, which is utterly ridiculous.
Versus people exposed to less LDL cholesterol.
No, they didn't show exposure to anything. They looked at SNPs purely.
And when you look at that, the exposure to lifetime...
No, there's no exposure established in any of these Mendelian studies. They are all guesstimates of a person's cholesterol level and or exposure over time. Not a measurement. We are done.
LDL cholesterol.
LDL cholesterol still does not exist, Layne Norton. There is still no such thing.
You can basically draw a straight line through it between that and the incidence of heart disease.
Well, you can draw a straight line between the assessment of what a person's cholesterol would be guessed based on the thing that's measured, the SNP, and of course you'll get a straight line because the thing on the y-axis is the estimate of what you would expect given what you expect the relationship to be. It's self-serving. There is no external validity here. They haven't measured anybody's LDL. Get the fuck out of here, you buffoon. Goodness gracious.
And if we look at a mechanistic level,
there's still only one syllable in the word and.
LDL cholesterol
still doesn't exist.
They have shown mechanistically,
no, they haven't,
penetrates the endothelium. It's actually not the LDL necessarily. It's the fact that it contains a protein called apolipoprotein B, which apolipoprotein D is what actually damages the endothelium. And
no, it doesn't, Layne. There is no evidence to support that claim extant anywhere in the literature whatsoever. You're talking about reductionist in vitro stuff at levels of ApoB vastly above what is physiologically going to occur.
Allows it to penetrate and then deposit the cholesterol there. Now, some people have said, well, it's not LDL. You don't have to worry about the large LDL.
Oh, Layne, you're just making noise still. It is absolutely clear that you have no understanding whatever of the science surrounding lipids in human metabolism. Absolutely no understanding of it whatever.
About the small oxidized LDL. I don't know if you've ever heard this
None
argument.
of the lipoproteins play a causal role in the development of atherosclerosis heart disease.
It's a very popular argument.
That's false.
What is true is that small oxidized LDL can more easily penetrate the endothelium.
So what?
But it deposits less total cholesterol.
So what?
Large LDL does not penetrate it as easily, but it still penetrates it.
So what? It's supposed to.
It deposits more cholesterol.
So what? It's supposed to do that. The cholesterol is there precisely to provide raw material for the repair of cells, Layne Norton.
Per LDL particle.
So what?
The net effect is both our...
Effect is the conjugate of cause. There are no studies that can inform us cause and effect on disease process in human beings as that relates to LDL, which is still not cholesterol.
Equally atherogenic.
Now, atherogenic is a buzz term, and it infers cause and effect. No evidence exists to support such a claim.
It's funny, I tell people, when something aligns with our personal beliefs, our level of skepticism is basically nothing.
Well, again, now you're just giving us your opinion again.
When something...
All of what you've said is your opinion, Layne Norton. You haven't provided us with a jot of scientific evidence of anything whatever.
Opposes our personal beliefs, it's like this, right? We are so skeptical. And so I tell carnivores all the time, if red meat had the data that fiber has behind it.
Well, fiber doesn't have data behind it, and neither does red meat or anything else in human nutrition as that relates to heart health outcomes over any decent period of time in human beings at all, Layne Norton still.
Support it being a health food. You all would lose your freaking minds anytime anyone even suggested that it might be bad for you.
We do anyway, because it isn't. There is no evidence that it's bad for us, so why would we sit there passively listening to imbeciles like you suggest that there is a risk to eating meat or fat, animal fat, because there isn't.
But because it doesn't align with your personal belief system, you won't hear a bar of it.
Right, so there you go. That was Layne Norton telling us the hidden dangers of the carnivore diet, apparently, during which time he provided us with no evidence of any kind, of any danger or risk of any kind to eating meat or animal fat whatsoever. While he was at it, he showed his absolute utter destitution of competence as a scientist and showed himself to be yet another mindless theologue, as we already knew, to go with our already well-established knowledge that Layne Norton is an absolute coward. All right, join me next time when someone else will be wrong on the interwebs. It doesn't look like slowing down any time, does it, staff? Any final words, Ted, for Layne Norton at all?
arsehole up your ass, up your cunt. Fuck you sideways, you fucking boring fucking cunt. Fuck off, you cunt.